Put your hands behind your back. Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted fraud." Those were the words that froze the entire bank lobby. The officer's voice was sharp, commanding, and full of something far deeper than authority: disrespect. Everyone turned to see who the criminal was supposed to be. But what they saw wasn't a thief or a scammer. It was a calm, well-dressed black woman standing at the teller's counter, holding a check made out to her name for $375,000. She didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply said, in the calmest voice imaginable, "Officer, that check is mine. I earned it." The officer smirked. "Sure you did," he said, tightening the cuffs on her wrists. "And I'm the President of the United States. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your city below, hit subscribe, and like if you believe justice and dignity matter. Now, let's go back to how it all started. It was a quiet Monday morning in Cresthaven, California, a coastal city that looked peaceful from the outside but carried decades of injustice underneath. At exactly 10:30 a.m., Dr. Lena Washington walked into Pacific Crest Bank, a glass and marble building with a long history of discrimination hidden behind its polished walls. Lena, 40 years old, an FBI agent specializing in civil rights and financial crimes, had come to deposit a settlement check from a whistleblower case. The money wasn't for herself. It was for the Washington Tech and Justice Center, a community program she planned to build in honor of her father, a journalist assassinated in 1992 after uncovering the same bank's corruption. Lena wore a simple white t-shirt and jeans. Nothing fancy. She didn't believe justice required a uniform, but in that moment, her simplicity became the reason she was profiled. Behind the counter stood Margaret Voss, the bank manager, a woman in her mid-50s with a polite smile that hid years of bias passed down through her family. Margaret's grandfather had once owned First Coastal Trust, the same bank under a different name, the same one accused of redlining black neighborhoods in the 80s. To her, power meant control, and control meant keeping certain people in their place. When Lena slid the check across the counter, Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get this?" she asked. Her tone was suspicious, not curious. Lena answered plainly. "It's a whistleblower settlement. The funds were approved by the Department of Justice last week." Margaret frowned. "That's quite a lot of money for someone like you." Those words lingered in the air. Someone like you. Lena stayed composed. Years in the bureau had taught her patience. She calmly handed over her ID, but Margaret didn't even glance at it. Instead, she whispered to the security guard, who stepped closer. Then she picked up her phone and called the police. "Yes, we have a woman here attempting to cash a fraudulent check," she said, glancing coldly at Lena. "No, she refuses to leave." Lena heard every word, and though she wanted to pull out her badge, to end it right there, she didn't. She wanted to see how far the prejudice would go. Her father had once told her, "The only way to expose darkness is to let it think you can't see it." 10 minutes later, 2 officers walked in, Derek Walsh and Nathan Cole. They were known in Cresthaven's black community, not for protecting people, but for humiliating them. Walsh, the older one, scanned the room and pointed. "That her?" Margaret nodded. "That's her." Walsh smirked. "All right, let's handle this." He approached Lena like a man stepping into a bar fight. "Ma'am, you want to tell me why you're trying to pass off a fake check?" Lena spoke clearly. "Officer, I'm Dr. Lena Washington with the FBI. This check is part of a verified settlement. Please call your supervisor before making a mistake you can't undo." Walsh's smirk widened. "Oh, you're FBI now? That's a new one." Nathan laughed under his breath. "Next, she'll tell us she's the mayor." The crowd of customers began whispering, pulling out phones, recording. One elderly man, Clarence Hayes, a retired veteran, stood up from the waiting area. "Officer, that woman didn't do anything wrong. he said firmly. "I saw the whole thing." But Walsh ignored him. He grabbed Lena's wrist, twisting it roughly behind her back. "Stop resisting!" he shouted. The sound echoed through the lobby. Lena didn't resist. She stood still, silent, enduring the humiliation that came with every click of the cuffs. Someone in the crowd yelled, "She said she's FBI! Check her badge!" But Walsh didn't. He slammed her against the counter, searched her bag, and held up the check like it was evidence of a crime. $375,000. He muttered. "Yeah, no way this is real." Margaret folded her arms, pretending to be calm. "Officers, thank you for responding quickly. We've had several scams lately." Lena looked at her and said softly, "You have no idea what you've just started." They dragged her out of the bank in handcuffs, through the front doors, past the watching crowd. Someone shouted. "That's wrong," another said. "You can't arrest her like that." But the officers kept walking. Outside, a young woman named Tanya Miller, one of the tellers, stood frozen. She had recorded the entire arrest on her phone. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "This isn't right." Within minutes, her video would hit social media. By noon, it would have 300,000 views at the police station. Lena was shoved into a holding cell. Her wrists were bruised, her voice calm but unbroken. She knew she had to think strategically. Every move mattered. On the wall across from her, a small mirror reflected the face of a woman who had seen injustice too many times to be shocked anymore. As she sat there, a flash of memory cut through her mind. A moment from her childhood. Her father, Malcolm Washington, sitting at his desk, typing late into the night. "One day, people will thank you for what you're doing," she had told him. He had smiled, worn and tired. "Or they'll try to stop me," he said. The next morning, he was gone, shot in his car outside a diner. Now, decades later, his daughter was being handcuffed in the same city, by the same type of power he had fought against. Hours passed. Lena was denied a phone call. When she asked for water, she was ignored. She watched officers walk by, some smirking, some avoiding eye contact. It wasn't the first time she'd seen this kind of arrogance, but it was the first time she'd been its target in such a personal way. Then, as the station quieted, one of the officers walked by her cell, holding her envelope of documents. A small paper slipped out, a ledger printout she didn't recognize. It fell to the floor just outside the bars. She leaned forward, reading the top line upside down. "Charity fund transfers. Pacific Crest Bank." Something clicked in her mind. Those weren't just numbers. They were codes. Transfers just below the $15,000 reporting threshold. It was the same pattern she had seen in a previous FBI money laundering case. At that moment, she realized something chilling. Her arrest wasn't just a case of racism. It was part of something much bigger. She looked up at the surveillance camera in the corner and whispered, "You picked the wrong woman." And that was the moment the story truly began. The cold steel bench pressed against Lena Washington's back as the hours dragged on. Her wrists were sore, the cuffs leaving red marks that spoke louder than any lawyer ever could. Across the hall, Officer Derek Walsh laughed with his partner Nathan Cole, typing up their report like it was just another day on the job. "Make sure you write that she resisted," Walsh said, tapping his pen on the desk. "We need to cover ourselves in case she tries to sue." Nathan chuckled. "Oh, she'll try. They always do." Lena sat still, listening. Years of FBI training had taught her when to fight and when to observe. For now, silence was her weapon. Her mind recorded every word, every timestamp, every gesture. At exactly 12:15 p.m., she noted Walsh's badge number on the back of her booking sheet. She didn't yet know that this detail, this one moment of quiet observation, would later dismantle an entire criminal network. Walsh walked over to her cell, arms folded, smirking. "So, Dr. Washington, is it? You sure you're not a vet or a dentist? Because I can't find your name anywhere in the system." His tone dripped with sarcasm. Lena lifted her eyes, calm but unflinching. "You're searching local records," she said softly. "Try federal." Walsh laughed out loud. "Oh, that's rich. Federal. I'll tell you what. You'll be lucky if this doesn't end with you in county jail for attempted fraud." He turned to leave but paused, almost enjoying the power imbalance. "You think wearing a badge makes you untouchable? I've seen your type before." Lena's voice stayed even. "You haven't seen my type. Not yet." Moments later, the heavy door opened, and Assistant District Attorney Victor Ramsey stepped inside the station. His tailored gray suit contrasted sharply with the smell of cheap coffee and sweat that filled the air. He wasn't there by coincidence. He was there because Margaret Voss had called him personally. Pacific Crest Bank had friends in high places, and Victor Ramsey was one of them. "Gentlemen," he greeted, nodding at Walsh and Cole, "you've done well. I'll handle it from here." Walsh smirked. Stepping aside, Ramsey approached the cell and looked at Lena through the bars. "Dr. Washington," he said slowly, as if savoring her name. "It's quite an accusation you're facing. Fraud, obstruction, possible identity theft. That's quite a list for someone claiming to be an FBI agent." Lena met his gaze. "You already know who I am. Victor. The real question is, why are you here?" For a moment, his face twitched, caught off guard by her confidence. "Be careful," he said in a lower tone. "You don't want to pick the wrong fight." He leaned closer to the bars. "You may think you know what's going on, but there are forces at play you can't control." She tilted her head. "Forces like you?" Ramsey's smile faded. "Just remember, people who dig too deep into Crest Haven's past tend to disappear." That's when it clicked. Lena had been investigating suspicious financial patterns in Crest Haven's charitable foundations for months. 8 fake nonprofits moving small, steady amounts of cartel money through banks under the radar. Each transaction was just under $15,000, carefully designed to avoid federal reporting laws. And one of those accounts belonged to Pacific Crest Bank. But there was something else, a detail she couldn't shake. Earlier, when Walsh had searched her bag, a small ledger printout had fallen out of her envelope. She hadn't brought it with her. Someone had slipped it in, maybe as a warning, maybe as a message. The title at the top read, "Charity Fund Transfers, Confidential." Each line item had a 3-letter code, the last one marked with initials she recognized, VR. It was Ramsey's signature. He wasn't just protecting the bank. He was part of the operation. Before Lena could process it, a uniformed officer approached. "Ramsey, she's due for transfer." Ramsey nodded, stepping back. "Good," he said. "Make sure she's processed properly." He turned to leave but glanced at her one last time. "Some doors," he said, "are best left closed." Then he walked out, leaving a chill in the air that no heater could fix. As the hours passed, Lena noticed something odd. A woman was brought into the holding area, a prisoner with nervous eyes and trembling hands. She was placed in the same cell, which was unusual. The woman sat beside Lena and whispered, "You really shouldn't be here." Lena looked at her calmly. "Neither should you." The woman leaned closer. "They said you're FBI. That true?" Lena didn't answer. The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice even further. "They sent me to ask what you know, about the ledger, about the charities." Lena's heart slowed, but her voice stayed level. "And who sent you?" The woman swallowed hard. "Ramsey. He said if I don't find out, I won't make it through the night." Before Lena could respond, the door opened and a guard barked. "Washington, out!" The woman quickly slid back to her corner, pretending to sleep. Lena was escorted down a narrow hallway lined with fluorescent lights. She knew this routine. It was meant to intimidate. But she also knew how to use it. Every reflective surface, every camera, was a tool. She counted the steps, memorized exits, noted which officers avoided eye contact. She was piecing together a map, not of the building, but of the corruption itself. In the interrogation room, she found something unexpected: her badge, placed neatly on the table. Next to it, a single piece of paper with a message written in red ink: "Don't deposit the check." Her stomach turned. That same warning had been texted to her phone before she entered the bank earlier that morning. Now, seeing it here, she realized someone inside law enforcement knew what was happening and was trying, in their own way, to protect her. She picked up the badge, felt the familiar weight in her hand, and whispered to herself, "You didn't come this far to back down." When the door opened again, Officer Nathan Cole stepped in. His usual arrogance was gone. He looked uneasy. "You didn't get that from me," he said quietly, nodding at the paper. "But you need to know something. Walsh isn't just a cop. He's been doing side jobs, private enforcement. He's on someone's payroll." Lena looked straight at him. "Whose payroll?" Nathan hesitated. "I don't know names, but they move cash through the bank. He picks up envelopes. No questions asked." That was enough. Lena had confirmation of what she suspected. The police, the ADA, and the bank were all part of the same network. But she couldn't act yet. She needed proof. And to get that, she had to get out of that cell alive. By evening, she was officially released, but not without humiliation. Her FBI credentials had finally been verified, but her release paperwork was delayed for hours, an intentional move to make her wait. When she stepped outside, the sun was gone. The world felt heavier. Reporters had already started circling, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Dr. Washington, are you pressing charges? Do you believe this was racial profiling? What do you plan to do next?" She didn't answer. She walked straight to her car, sat behind the wheel, and let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then she called one person she trusted more than anyone: her mother. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling for the first time all day. "They tried to break me today." Eleanor Washington's voice came through the line, steady and strong. "Baby, they didn't break you. They just reminded you what you're fighting for." That night, Lena drove home under the glow of the coastal lights, her father's old notebook resting on the passenger seat. She opened it and saw his handwriting from decades ago, notes on the same bank, the same people, the same greed. A single phrase stood out in his bold, faded script: "Truth always leaves a trail." Lena looked out toward the dark waves and whispered, "Then I'll follow it." Because now, it wasn't just about her arrest, it was about finishing what her father started, and bringing every name in that ledger to justice. By sunrise, the entire city of Cresthaven had seen the video. 300,000 views in 3 hours, then 500,000 by dawn. The footage showed everything: the handcuffs, the disbelief on Lena Washington's face, the arrogance in Officer Walsh's voice. It played on every morning news channel, every phone screen, every social media feed. And with each replay, the same question echoed: how could this happen to an FBI agent? But Lena didn't care about the headlines. She cared about the truth. She cared about the trail her father had started 30 years ago and the rot still hiding beneath the city's glass towers. The moment she stepped out of her apartment that morning, she was no longer just an agent. She had become a symbol. Reporters waited outside her door like vultures circling a storm. Dr. Washington, do you plan to sue the city? Are you still with the FBI? Was the check real? She ignored them all, walking past the cameras with quiet focus. Her phone buzzed constantly. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, messages from strangers calling her a hero, others calling her a liar. But one name stood out on the screen: Ethan Brooks. Ethan had been her partner once, a cybersecurity specialist at the Bureau with a mind sharp enough to break any firewall. When he arrived at her apartment, he carried 2 cups of coffee and a look of deep concern. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Physically? Yes," she said. "Professionally? I just became a PR nightmare." Ethan frowned. "They suspended you?" Lena nodded. "Administrative leave? For optics. They said, the Bureau doesn't like attention, especially when it proves what they'd rather ignore." Ethan set his coffee down and leaned forward. "Then we work from the outside. You've still got friends in the field office. I'll reach out quietly." While they spoke, Lena's mother, Eleanor, was at home watching the same footage on her old television, tears running down her face, not of sadness, but of recognition. She had lived long enough to know the patterns of injustice. The city might have changed its name from First Coastal Trust to Pacific Crest Bank, but the cruelty was the same. She pulled a box from her attic, dust-covered and heavy. Inside were records from the 80s, maps, loan applications, rejection letters, all proof of redlining and racial bias. On the last page was her husband Malcolm's handwriting, underlined in blue ink. "Follow the money. It always tells the story." By noon, Lena and Ethan sat surrounded by stacks of those records at her kitchen table. Ethan opened his laptop and started typing. "Okay. I've been tracking the digital footprint from those charity accounts. They're using rotating shell entities. 8 in total. Each one funnels money under $15,000. And guess what? The IP addresses point back to the same server, the bank's internal network." Lena leaned over, scanning the screen. "Which means someone inside the bank is approving these transfers manually." Ethan nodded. "And guess who has access to override those security checks? Margaret Voss." It was the confirmation Lena needed, but also the beginning of something darker. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I think this goes beyond her. When I was in holding, Ada Victor Ramsey showed up. He threatened me. I think he's tied to this." Ethan froze. "The district attorney's office? That's heavy." "Lena," she sighed. "He mentioned people disappearing for digging too deep, and now I know why." As the two continued digging, their work was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Pastor Abigail Turner, a tall, dignified woman with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of presence that filled any room with quiet authority. "Dr. Washington," she said gently, "you don't know me, but I know your mother. I'm Pastor Turner from Greater Hope Baptist. We've been watching what happened to you. The community wants to stand with you." Lena looked uncertain. "I'm not sure what good that'll do. The system protects its own." Abigail smiled faintly. "Then we'll make the system answer to the people. We've organized before. We'll do it again." They sat together, and the pastor's words flowed like truth itself. "What they did to you is what they've done to our sons, our daughters, our fathers, for generations. But when they did it to you, they did it to someone who can fight back from the inside. That's why this matters." Lena nodded slowly. "You're right. Then we'll fight it the right way. We'll expose them piece by piece." That evening, Abigail went live on social media, standing in front of her church. What happened to Dr. Lena Washington is not an isolated mistake. It's a symptom of a disease that's been growing in our city for decades. We're calling for accountability at the bank, the police department, and the district attorney's office. Meet us at the church tomorrow night. Within hours, The post was shared thousands of times. Local reporters, activists, and church leaders began preparing. The community of Cresthaven, once silenced, had found its voice again. Meanwhile, Ethan was discovering something disturbing. His computer system, normally impenetrable, was acting strange. "Lena, someone's inside my network," he muttered, typing rapidly. "They're tracing my location." Lena stood up, alert. "Can you shut it down?" "I'm trying," he said, sweat forming on his forehead. "They're good. Government-level encryption. That means someone on the inside." The thought hit them both at once. "An insider at the Bureau," Lena whispered. Marcus. Marcus Reed had been her mentor for years, the man who trained her, guided her, and taught her how to read corruption like a language. But he had also been close to Victor Ramsey during his years in the field. The realization left a bitter taste. "If Marcus is feeding Ramsey information," she said, "then the entire Bureau investigation is compromised." Ethan looked at her gravely. "Then we're on our own." Later that night, Lena drove to her mother's house. The air was heavy with quiet resolve. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, waiting. "You know, baby," she said softly, "your daddy used to say truth is the most dangerous weapon a black person can hold. That's why they fear you. That's why they came after him." Lena's eyes softened. "I'm not afraid of them. Mom, I'm afraid of failing him." Eleanor reached across the table, holding her daughter's hand. "Then don't fail yourself. You were made for this fight." The next morning, the video reached national outlets, CNN, MSNBC, and even major newspapers. Public pressure mounted. Pacific Crest Bank's headquarters was swarmed by reporters. Margaret Voss issued a short statement claiming a misunderstanding, but her trembling voice betrayed guilt. The mayor called for an internal review, while the Cresthaven Police Department insisted they had followed procedure. But the community wasn't buying it. By the end of the week, a rally formed outside the bank, small at first, just a few dozen people with handmade signs. "Justice for Lena. End police bias. We are watching." Among them stood Clarence Hayes, the elderly veteran who had witnessed the arrest. He held his phone high, replaying the footage for anyone who would stop and watch. "They need to see what happened," he told a reporter, "because pretending it didn't happen is how it keeps happening." Back at Lena's apartment, Ethan analyzed new data. "The cartel money is moving faster," he said. "They're trying to shut everything down before we expose them." Lena nodded. "That means we're close. Too close." She stared out the window, watching police cars circle the block. "They're watching us, Ethan, but that's fine. Let them watch. When this ends, I want them to see who brought them down." That night, she opened her father's old journal again. A line caught her eye. "Evil never hides. It pretends to be respectable." She smiled faintly, closing the book, because now she understood exactly what he meant. The faces of power, the bank manager, the ADA, the officers, they all wore respectability like armor, but she would strip it away, one truth at a time. As she turned off the light, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just 2 words glowed on the screen. "They know." Lena stared at it for a long moment, her pulse steady, her resolve unshaken. "Then let them come," she whispered. "I'm ready." Because this was no longer just about a wrongful arrest. It was about justice for an entire city, and the beginning of a war Cresthaven would never forget. The first threat came 3 nights later. It wasn't a phone call or a letter. It was a sound. A single gunshot echoing outside Lena Washington's apartment just after midnight. She dropped to the floor instinctively, years of FBI training kicking in. The bullet shattered the lamp near her window, sending glass across the room. Her heart pounded, but her mind stayed calm. She crawled toward the wall, grabbed her Glock from the nightstand, and peered through the blinds. The street was empty. The only movement, the slow spin of a distant streetlight. Whoever fired the shot wanted her to know, "We can reach you by morning." She was at her mother's house, pretending everything was fine. Eleanor poured her coffee but noticed her daughter's silence. "They tried to scare you last night, didn't they?" Lena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Eleanor sighed. "You think this is new? They did the same thing to your father when he got too close." Lena looked at her mother, her jaw tight. "Then they haven't learned who they're dealing with." Meanwhile, across town, Ada Victor Ramsey was losing control. His cartel partners were nervous, calling from burner phones, demanding to know why the FBI was sniffing around. "You said she was handled." One voice hissed through the static. Ramsey gripped his phone tightly. "She was supposed to be. The cops botched it. I'll fix it." He hung up and rubbed his temples. His reflection stared back from the glass wall of his office, an image of a man who had once believed he was the law but had become everything he once prosecuted. On his desk sat a photo of his daughter. Pale, gaunt, lost in addiction. That was his weakness. The cartel owned him because of her. If he refused them, she'd pay the price. That was the deal. At the same time, Lena and Ethan were connecting more dots. Ethan had cracked an encrypted email chain between the bank and the DA's office, revealing off-the-record transfers linked to Shell charities. "This proves it," Ethan said, scrolling through the data. "Ramsey's been signing off on fake charity audits. They're routing money from the cartel through Pacific Crest, cleaning it through donation accounts." Lena nodded slowly. "He's not just complicit. He's orchestrating it." But before she could respond, Ethan's computer beeped. "Hold on," he said, typing fast. "Someone's remote accessing my drive again. It's not external this time. It's internal. Federal network." He stopped. "It's Marcus." Lena froze. Marcus Reed, her mentor, her friend, the man who taught her everything she knew about integrity and justice. Was the leak? It didn't make sense. "Are you sure?" she asked. Ethan turned the screen toward her. "Positive. The signal's coming from his bureau credentials." Lena leaned back, feeling the betrayal like a knife twisting slowly. "He's working with Ramsey," she said quietly. "He must be compromised." That evening, Lena called Marcus from a blocked number. When he answered, his voice sounded tired, hesitant. "Lena, you shouldn't be calling me," she replied coldly. "Then why are you feeding Ramsey information from the bureau?" Silence. Then a heavy sigh. "You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand you're protecting a man tied to a cartel," she said. "You trained me to follow the truth." "Marcus, what happened to you?" His voice cracked slightly. "He has something on me. Lena, a mistake from years ago. A case that went wrong. People died, and Ramsey covered it up. If I go down, so does the bureau." Lena's voice softened, but her disappointment was sharper than anger. "Then you already went down. You just didn't realize it." She hung up, her hand trembling not from fear, but from heartbreak. The next day, Lena drove along Crest Haven's coastal highway, the ocean glimmering beside her, waves breaking against the cliffs. It should have been peaceful. But she noticed something in her rearview mirror, a black pickup truck following too close. She took an exit, then another. The truck followed every turn. Her instincts screamed danger. She pressed her phone's voice command. "Call Ethan." His voice came through. "Yeah? Someone's tailing me," she said. "Black Chevy, tinted windows." "Get off the main road," he said quickly. "Head toward the service ramp, less traffic, more exits." But before she could respond, the truck accelerated, slamming into the back of her car. The impact threw her forward, airbag deploying, glass flying. She swerved, trying to regain control, but the truck hit her again. Harder this time. Pushing her toward the guardrail, Lena's training took over. She cut the wheel hard left, braked suddenly, and the truck shot past her. Losing traction, it spun across the road, crashing through the barrier and tumbling down toward the rocks below. Smoke rose into the night air. Lena sat there, gripping the steering wheel, her pulse hammering. She'd survived, but she knew what it meant. The cartel had officially declared war. Hours later. She was back at Ethan's apartment, bruised but alive. Ethan stared at her car through the window. It was nearly totaled. "You need protection," he said. "Bodyguards, surveillance, something." She shook her head. "No, that's what they want. To make me hide. I'm done hiding." Ethan sighed. "You're too calm for someone they just tried to kill." She looked him dead in the eye. "Calm is all I've got left." The next morning, the city woke to chaos. Ramsey's office leaked an edited video of Lena's arrest, conveniently cutting out the part where she identified herself as an FBI agent. The clip showed only her voice saying, "You have no idea what you've just started," making it sound like a threat. Talk shows ran it non-stop. Commentators called her defiant and unstable. The narrative had flipped. Ramsey had turned public opinion against her. Deputy Director Sandra Powell called Lena to her office. "You've put the Bureau in a difficult position," she said. "The media's portraying you as a rogue agent." Lena stood firm. "I'm being framed by one of your own." Sandra sighed. "Marcus Reed is a decorated agent. Be careful with accusations like that." Lena stepped closer. "Then look at his access logs. He's been leaking case files to the DA's office. Check the timestamps against my arrest." Sandra hesitated. "If what you're saying is true, it'll blow up the entire district." "Good," Lena replied. "Then it's time it burned." Meanwhile, at a quiet cafe downtown, Marcus sat alone, guilt carving deep lines into his face. He knew what was coming. Ramsey had already stopped answering his calls. He opened a sealed envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside was a single photo of his wife and son, taken outside their home, on the back. A message, "Stay loyal, or they pay." He closed his eyes, realizing the trap was complete. That night, Lena returned home to find her mother sitting with Pastor Abigail. They had organized a citywide protest for the weekend. 600 people expected to gather outside Pacific Crest Bank. "We're not backing down," Abigail said firmly. "If they can humiliate an FBI agent, imagine what they do to people without power." Lena smiled faintly. "Then we make sure everyone sees it." As the night deepened, Lena looked out the window at the dark city skyline. Somewhere out there, Walsh and Cole were still patrolling. Ramsey was still scheming. Marcus was still trapped in guilt. And the cartel was still watching. But she wasn't the same woman they handcuffed in that bank. She had been humiliated, betrayed, nearly killed. And she was still standing. Her father's words echoed in her memory. "Truth is patient. It survives bullets, lies, and fear." She whispered to herself, "Then let the truth survive one more night." The next morning would bring the protest, the turning point of everything. But for now, the city slept, unaware that by sunrise, Cresthaven would be forced to look at itself in the mirror, and this time, there would be no turning away. Saturday morning arrived heavy with tension, the kind that you could feel before a storm. By 9 o'clock, the plaza outside Pacific Crest Bank was unrecognizable. 600 people filled the streets of Cresthaven. Families, elders, students, pastors, veterans, some holding signs, some holding phones, all holding anger that had been waiting for generations to be heard. Reporters lined the sidewalks, drones hovered above, and the sound of gospel music floated through the air. On the front steps stood Pastor Abigail Turner, her voice echoing through the loudspeaker, calm yet powerful. "We are here for justice," she declared. "We are here for Dr. Lena Washington and for every person humiliated, silenced, or dismissed because of the color of their skin." The crowd roared in agreement. Lena stood at the edge of the steps beside her mother, quiet but resolute. She wore no badge, no uniform, just a white blouse and dark jeans, the same clothes she had worn on the day of her arrest. Her eyes scanned the crowd, the banners, the sea of faces that had come to stand beside her. This wasn't just a protest anymore. It was a reckoning. Across the street, Officer Derek Walsh adjusted his sunglasses, watching the crowd with a smirk. "Can you believe this circus?" he muttered to his partner, Nathan Cole. 600 people crying over one arrest. Nathan shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should just stay back." "Derek, too many cameras." Walsh ignored him. "You're getting soft. We'll do what we always do. Keep order." He placed a small packet in his pocket, his fingers closing around it tightly. It contained 150 grams of cocaine. The plan was simple. Slip it into Lena's bag. Accuse her of trafficking. Destroy her credibility. Ramsey had ordered it himself. "End this today," he had said over the phone. "No more videos, no more protests." But Lena had anticipated something like this. Her FBI instincts told her that Ramsey and Walsh wouldn't let her live long enough to win in court. So she made her own plan. She had already contacted Deputy Director Sandra Powell and the Department of Justice. What Walsh and Ramsey didn't know was that several plainclothes DOJ observers were hidden among the crowd, equipped with body cameras and live feeds. Every word, every movement was being recorded. As the chants grew louder, Walsh and Cole pushed through the crowd. "Police, make way!" Walsh shouted, flashing his badge. He approached Lena directly, his expression a mix of arrogance and hate. "Dr. Washington," he said mockingly, "nice little rally you got here. Shame it's about to end." Lena didn't flinch. "What are you doing here? Officer Walsh?" "Just doing my job," he sneered. "Funny how trouble seems to follow you." He stepped closer, hand grazing the pocket that held the cocaine. Pastor Abigail noticed and instinctively stepped between them. "You need to leave," she warned. "This is a peaceful protest." Walsh laughed. "Lady, peace ended the second this liar showed up," before anyone could react. Walsh reached for Lena's bag. "What are you doing?" she asked sharply. He ignored her, unzipping it halfway, pretending to search for weapons. That's when he tried to slip the packet inside. But a voice shouted, "Stop right there!" It was one of the DOJ observers, flashing his credentials. "Agent Daniel Reese, Department of Justice, step away from her!" The crowd fell silent. Cameras turned. Walsh froze. "What is this?" he demanded. "An ambush," Lena said quietly, her voice steady. "You should have checked who was watching." Walsh's face twisted in fury. He lunged toward Lena, but Abigail stepped forward, swinging her protest sign like a shield. It hit his arm, knocking the packet from his hand. The cocaine spilled onto the ground, white powder glinting under the sunlight. The crowd gasped. Phones went up instantly, filming from every angle. Walsh stumbled back, realizing what had just happened. She planted it!" he yelled desperately. But it was too late. The DOJ agents were already on him, restraining him as he shouted and cursed. Nathan Cole raised his hands in surrender, his voice shaking. "I'm done. Derek, I'm not going to prison for you." Within seconds, uniformed officers swarmed the scene. DOJ cameras recorded every detail. Lena stood motionless as they cuffed Walsh, reading him his rights. The crowd began to cheer, a roar of vindication rising through the air. "Justice!" someone shouted. "Justice for Lena!" Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "You did it!" she whispered. Lena shook her head. No, we did it! But the battle wasn't over. Back at the district attorney's office, Victor Ramsey was watching the chaos unfold live on his television. His hands trembled as he saw Walsh in cuffs. No, he muttered. No, this can't be happening. His phone rang. It was one of the cartel contacts. You promised control, the voice hissed. Now your cops are on camera. Your name's in the ledger, and we're exposed. Ramsey's voice broke. Give me time. I can fix it. You had time, the voice said coldly. Now you're a liability. The line went dead. Meanwhile, in the plaza, DOJ agent Reese approached Lena. Dr. Washington, we've got enough to open a federal case. Money laundering, obstruction, civil rights violations, the works. Lena nodded, still processing the moment. Ramsey won't go down quietly, she said. Reese smiled. He doesn't have to. He's already falling. As they spoke, Ethan appeared, carrying a laptop. Lena, you need to see this, he said urgently. He opened a live feed showing Ramsey's office security cameras. Ramsey pacing, burning documents, shouting into his phone, Ethan explained. When he blackmailed Marcus, he gave us a way in. I've been recording his system for 48 hours. Every call, every signature, every transfer, it's all there. Lena stared at the screen. You have it all? Everything, Ethan said. And Marcus just confessed. He turned himself in this morning. He's ready to testify. Tears welled in Lena's eyes. After all this, she whispered, maybe redemption's still possible. Then the crowd began to sing. Softly at first, then louder, unified. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring. It wasn't planned. It just happened. The old anthem of survival, of strength, of faith. Eleanor joined in, her voice trembling with pride. Abigail raised her hands toward the sky, for the first time in years. Cresthaven felt hope. Lena stood still, listening to the song that had carried her ancestors through centuries of pain and struggle. She looked around at the faces, black, white, brown, all standing together, singing, and she realized that her father had been right. Truth doesn't die, it may be buried, mocked, or handcuffed, but it always finds a way back to the light. Suddenly, a news drone descended low, broadcasting the scene live nationwide. Every major network picked up the feed, an image of a community standing for justice while corrupt officers were led away in handcuffs. The narrative had changed. Lena was no longer the accused. She was the proof that courage still mattered, as the final verse echoed. Agent Reese leaned toward her. You should know, he said quietly. The DOJ just issued warrants for Ramsey and Margaret Voss. They're going to be picked up within the hour. Lena exhaled, feeling years of tension release from her shoulders. Then it's over, she said softly. Reese shook his head. No, Dr. Washington. It's beginning. The crowd's singing rose into a wave of sound that rolled through the city, carried by wind and faith. In that moment, Lena didn't feel like a victim or a hero. She felt like a bridge between what was broken and what could finally be healed. She looked toward the horizon where the sun broke through the clouds and whispered, Daddy, we did it. Because this wasn't just a protest anymore. It was history, alive, breathing, and unstoppable, and for the first time. Cresthaven could see the dawn of something it had almost forgotten. Justice. By the next morning, the city of Cresthaven woke to a different reality. The video of Officer Walsh's arrest had spread across the nation, played on every major network, dissected on every talk show. Headlines read, Corrupt Officers Exposed During Live Protest and FBI Agent Framed by ADA. DOJ Steps In. What began as a single act of racial profiling had ignited a national reckoning. within 24 hours. The Department of Justice filed formal charges, obstruction of justice, money laundering, and civil rights violations. Walsh and Cole sat in separate interrogation rooms, stripped of their uniforms, faces pale under fluorescent light. Walsh's arrogance had drained away, replaced by fear. "It wasn't just me," he muttered to the investigators. "Ramsey gave the orders. He said she was a threat to the city." But the cameras had caught everything, and his words were now too little, too late. That same morning, FBI agents swarmed the Pacific Crest Bank headquarters. Margaret Voss was escorted out in handcuffs, her once perfect hair disheveled, her eyes darting toward the reporters shouting her name. "Mrs. Voss, did you know about the laundering? Was this about your grandfather's legacy?" She tried to speak, but no words came. Inside her office, investigators uncovered a hidden drive containing 30 years of financial records, evidence of transactions that connected the bank to multiple shell charities and cartel accounts. The entire operation, spanning millions of dollars, was laid bare in a single day. By evening, the bank's board voted to declare bankruptcy. The name Pacific Crest that had once stood for prestige now symbolized corruption and greed. At the same time, the downfall of ADA Victor Ramsey unfolded like a slow-motion disaster when federal agents arrived at his home. They found him sitting in the dark, a half-empty glass of whiskey beside him, the television still playing the protest footage on repeat. "Mr. Ramsey," one of the agents announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction, and aiding a criminal enterprise." He didn't resist. He just stared blankly at the screen, watching himself unravel. When they placed him in the back of the car, reporters crowded the driveway, cameras flashing like lightning. Someone shouted, "Was it worth it?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His empire, built on manipulation and lies, had collapsed overnight. His trial began weeks later, broadcast live to a nation hungry for accountability. Lena testified calmly, recounting the details of her arrest and the conspiracy behind it. She looked Ramsey in the eye as she spoke, not with hatred, but with something colder. Resolve. The courtroom fell silent when she said, "Justice isn't revenge, it's truth, and truth doesn't need permission to stand." Ramsey lowered his gaze. When it was his turn to speak, his voice trembled. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was trying to protect my daughter." The judge's response was swift. "And how many daughters did your corruption destroy?" "Mr. Ramsey." Marcus Reed, broken by guilt, took the stand next. His confession was devastating. "I betrayed the Bureau," he admitted. "I let blackmail dictate my loyalty, but Dr. Washington, she reminded me what integrity means." His words, carried across every major outlet, became a turning point. The Bureau launched an internal ethics reform, and Marcus was sentenced to 2 years, reduced for cooperation. It wasn't freedom, but it was a chance to rebuild. Walsh and Cole were convicted of civil rights violations, perjury, and obstruction of justice. The judge sentenced them to 12 years each. Margaret Voss received 8 years for money laundering and fraud. Victor Ramsey faced the harshest penalty, life in federal prison without parole. His daughter, the one he had sacrificed everything for, entered rehab under federal protection. The irony was cruel but poetic. His corruption had bought her comfort, but it took justice to save her life. Chief Maria Gonzalez, once silent in the face of misconduct, resigned from her post and agreed to testify against her department. In exchange, she received a reduced sentence and began working with the DOJ's new Civil Rights Task Force. "It's not redemption," she said at the press conference, "but it's a start." Lena watched the sentencing from a distance, standing outside the courthouse with Ethan, her mother, and Pastor Abigail. The crowd behind them was calm this time. No chants, no shouting, just quiet respect. The same city that once handcuffed her now looked to her for guidance. Reporters surrounded her as she walked toward her car, asking what justice felt like. She smiled faintly. "It feels unfinished," she said, "because real justice isn't about punishment. It's about what we build afterward." That evening, the sunset bathed Cresthaven in orange light. On television, anchors spoke of reform, accountability, and change. The Department of Justice announced a nationwide review of police conduct and financial institutions tied to discriminatory practices. The story had become a movement, one that reached far beyond California. As Lena sat with her mother that night, Eleanor placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You've done what your father never got the chance to finish," she said softly. Lena looked at her, eyes glistening. "He started this fight. I just refused to stop." Eleanor smiled through her tears. That's how legacy works. In the weeks that followed, Cresthaven began to heal. Pacific Crest's former branches were turned over to the city, and one of them, once the scene of Lena's arrest, was designated for something new, the future home of the Washington Tech and Justice Center, a place where truth, not bias, would be the foundation. And as the building's old sign was taken down, one simple truth became clear to everyone watching. Justice may move slowly, but when it finally arrives, it shakes the ground beneath those who once thought they were untouchable. 6 months later, the city of Cresthaven felt like a different place. The anger, the chaos, the headlines, all had faded into something quieter, something lasting. On a bright morning in October, the same plaza that once echoed with protest chants now filled with the sound of celebration. The old Pacific Crest Bank, once a monument to greed and discrimination, had been reborn. Its glass doors now bore a new name engraved in silver: the Washington Tech and Justice Center. The transformation was more than physical. It was moral. Where suspicion and fear once ruled, opportunity now lived. People from every part of the city gathered there that morning. Students, church choirs, veterans, families, and community leaders, each carrying the same feeling in their hearts: pride. At the center of it all stood Dr. Lena Washington, wearing a modest navy suit, the same composure she had shown on the day everything changed. Beside her was her mother, Eleanor, holding her hand, eyes filled with tears she no longer had to hide. The crowd quieted as Pastor Abigail Turner took the stage, her voice strong, clear, and full of conviction. "This building was once the scene of injustice," she said, "but today, it becomes a house of learning, of truth, and of second chances. Cresthaven didn't just watch justice happen, it helped build it." The people cheered. For the first time, the plaza felt like holy ground. Inside, the transformation was breathtaking. The marble floors that once reflected the polished shoes of bankers now carried the footsteps of students learning law, coding, and finance. The cold corporate counters had become classrooms and legal clinics for those who once had nowhere to turn. On the main wall hung a bronze plaque that read, "Justice requires no verification." It was simple, but powerful. A reminder of the day Lena's honesty had been doubted, and her name had been cleared not by proof, but by truth. Beneath it hung another plaque honoring her father, Malcolm Washington, the journalist whose murder decades earlier had started this story long before the world noticed. Beneath his name, his favorite quote was engraved, "Truth always leaves a trail." Ethan Brooks stood by one of the new computer labs, watching young students practice digital forensics, the same tools he had once used to expose corruption. "You really did it," he said softly when Lena joined him. She smiled. "No, we did. The city did. My father just planted the seed," he nodded, "and you made sure it grew nearby." Pastor Abigail led a group of children through the halls, explaining how the center would serve more than 150 students every year, training them not just to build careers, but to defend justice itself. When the ceremony ended, the choir began to sing, "Lift Every Voice and Sing." It wasn't planned. It simply rose from the crowd like memory finding melody again. Eleanor's voice joined softly at first, then stronger. The crowd followed. The song carried over the plaza, through the streets, through the city that had once looked away from injustice, but now faced it head-on. Lena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. It was more than a song. It was her father's dream, reborn in harmony. Later that afternoon, Lena stood by the window of her new office on the top floor, watching people leave the plaza. The same view that once haunted her, the marble steps, the glass facade, now gave her peace. The world outside still had its problems, but Cresthaven had proven something extraordinary. A single act of truth could change an entire system. Her mother walked in quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," Eleanor said with a soft smile, "your daddy would have loved to see this." Lena nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He's here. Mom. Every wall. Every word. It's him." Moments later, there was a knock at the door. It was a young woman, timid but determined, holding a folder close to her chest. "Dr. Washington," she said nervously. "I'm in the recovery program. My name's—" She hesitated, tears forming. "Alyssa Ramsey." Lena froze for a moment, recognizing the name, the daughter of the man who tried to destroy her. "I wanted to thank you," the girl continued softly, "for letting me join the tech program. I know what my father did. I just want to be better than him." Lena stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Then you already are," she said, when the girl left. Lena turned back to the window, her reflection merging with the city skyline. For the first time in years, she felt light again. Justice had been served. Yes, but compassion had completed the story. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about redemption. As the sun began to set, the words on the plaque near the door caught the last beam of golden light. Justice requires no verification. And in that glow, Lena smiled. The fight was over, but the work had just begun. Cresthaven was no longer a city of silence. It had found its voice, and it would never lose it again, because the truth, once spoken, never dies. It simply waits for the right person to make it heard. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. It truly helps us share more powerful stories about justice, dignity, and hope.